Movie buff specialist Phil and John are back, and we have done it somehow, some way. We have managed to get through our favorite 100 movies of all time. We are at episode number 100 of this series, our number one movies ever. And it's very funny because we started this back in January of 2021, and John and I met in person for the first time yesterday. Literally last night, John and I met, and that was the first time that we were in the same room at the same time. So up until then, we both could have been Brad Pitt because we'd never all been in the same room at the same time. But here we are, finally, after all this time, up to number one. And I think my favorite part about this entire series is that we found two movies that the other person didn't like nearly as much as we do and put them as our number one, which I think just speaks to what movies are and why it was so fun to do this in the first place. But just to give you an idea, I want to see if I can find the exact date. I said I was going to do this beforehand, and then I just totally didn't do that. But yeah, first episode was January 26, 2021. It is May 25th, 2023. There you go. Somebody do the math on how many days that is. But anyway, John, welcome. Hello. Welcome to the final episode. How's your voice feeling coming into this? Because I got none.
My voice is fine because it turns out I'm really socially awkward. So I wasn't doing a lot of yelling last night. And I didn't already podcast today. So I think it's doing a little better than yours.
Yeah, that's one of those problems, like being a podcaster and just being an overly social person. Like I have like the personality of somebody who's way funnier and you know just like way more charming than I really am. So like I go to these things and I just bounce around. And we're talking about we went to the Survivor finale and I just bounce around. I scream, I talk, I do everything. But damn, you better believe I'm sitting down and doing this podcast tonight because John, we're gonna have a 2-month break in between here. So anybody who's listening. We have a date. We're going to announce it at the end. We're going to do it like all at the end. We're going to talk about our two favorite movies of all time first. And that is Stalker from 1979 and The Deer Hunter from 1978. First time for each of us watching each other's number one movie. I'll let you start with Stalker because obviously nobody knows what the hell Stalker is. It has a really high letterbox rating, but I think that's because only people who like film are going to watch Stalker. So John, let's break it down. What do you got going on here?
Okay. So to the surprise of no one absolutely anywhere, Stalker is a accumulation of like a lot of my favorite things. Light sci-fi, philosophical quandaries into existence and just human nature and all things like that. And it's this obscure Russian thing. So, of course, John knows about it. No one else has heard of it. This is, in my opinion, just the greatest science fiction movie ever made. It is just on a whole other level when it comes to examining just being human. And that's what science fiction is all about. I've said it so many times on this podcast. Science fiction has to investigate human nature. That's why Star Wars isn't science fiction. Star Wars is a fantasy film. And what Stalker does, Stalker isn't even like the deepest science fiction. It's not heavy science fiction where you are, gallivanting around in these unknown worlds. Everything that happens in Stalker, you could watch this movie and think, this is just the Soviet Union. There's nothing in this movie that takes you out of this world. But instead, what we have is this really strange Russian, like Wizard of Oz-esque film that has these three different men who have these three completely different ideologies about life and these aspects of life that they represent. And they're on this journey to go to this room. Just this room. It's so ambiguous. They think it's going to grant their deepest desires. And every single one of them is too scared to go into it in the end. It is so elegant. What Tarkovsky does with everything in this film, with the cinematography, with the direction, with the script, it is so tight. It is such an incredibly built film. I can't stop raving about it. And yes, I have gone on record saying it's no longer my number one. after this because Casablanca has taken it over. But that's because I can watch Casablanca an infinite amount of times.
Yeah.
I watch Stalker, and I have to examine my life for like months before I can watch it again.
It's dense. It's really, really dense. And I will say my one knock is that it's almost like too dense considering what the actual plot is, if that makes sense. Where like Mirror, it's not that dense,
Mm-hmm.
and the plot is kind of like all over. And I love Mirror. I think Mirror's my favorite Tarkovsky to this point.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas this, it was like, okay, like he built up the suspense of where they into the zone and then the room and like all of that. And I like he would grab me and they would have the philosophical conversations, which are great, but they're so hard to take in on one viewing. Like it's
Mm-hmm.
so hard for me to talk about this movie because it's one viewing and it's 2 hours and 45 minutes long. And so much of it is just philosophy and like, what is this? But there were parts of it where I was like, does he actually like why is this what's happening? Like so for
Mm-hmm.
it felt like a lot of it was like, oh, you can't just go in a straight line. And I was like, okay, when was this established? Like, why is this just coming up now? Like, it felt like there was some stuff just kind of being thrown at the wall. And that was weird to me as like a juxtaposition to the really deep philosophical conversations. Cause I was like, why isn't it just like, we're just going? We're just going. And I mean, half of that could just be it's a 70s movie, so the budget's not the same. But that was a big question for me.
Phil, I'm going to rebuttal your question with a question.
Okay.
When is life ever a straight line?
Oh, I agree. I agree. That's fine. And I get that, but I do feel like with the lug nuts, I don't get the lug nuts. Like I don't get it, and maybe you can explain it, but I
I
don't get
can.
it.
I can.
Yeah. So like when I'm watching it, I'm like, okay, they're throwing lug nuts. They can't walk in a straight line. They have to go this way. It's dangerous, but they talk a lot about the danger without me ever really feeling like there's a lot of danger.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah.
so that was like a big thing for me.
So what the stalker is doing with the lug nuts is determining if the path is safe to proceed.
Mhm. How is the
Like
lug nut determining that?
determining if there's a trap or not. Because as the stalker explains when they get to the zone is ever changing. The path is
Mhm.
never the same twice because it changes, it morphs. There's a lot of similarities to this and what we see in Annihilation.
Yeah, they are almost identical.
Yeah, I mean, it's very clear where the inspiration
Yeah.
for that story came from because it's definitely Tarkovsky.
Mhm.
And to be fair, this is based off of a Strugatsky brothers novel. And for those who are not very versed in their Russian literature, the Strugatsky brothers are like some of the pinnacles of Russian science fiction.
Mhm.
If you read some Strugatsky brothers, you might find a lot of similarities to Avatar in some of their works.
Mm. So they
And
suck?
like,
Sorry, go ahead.
no, they wrote it well. But the thing is like you this is like huge Russian literature. And what we're seeing in this zone is that it is changing all the time, just like life, right? And it is that allegory for life, how you never know exactly how to proceed. We see the only trap we really see. We see a lot of threat of traps. We see the stalker getting like, whoa, traps. We see two traps in this entire movie.
Mhm.
We see the time when the writer does walk in a straight line and the voice tells him not to proceed, and we see them loop back
Mhm.
when they're trying to go forward, and they loop back to the professor. Those are the two traps that we really see. And just because of that, like I think just how subtle those traps are really raises the terror of this because it's again one of those things that we talk about with horror movies a lot. The unseen is way scarier than the scene. And in
Mhm.
this, all we're told, like just these bare minimum details we're told, goes so far in this movie because they don't need to show anything. Because the looming threat is always there.
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, I get it. I really do. Like, and I really enjoyed like the stuff that was similar to Annihilation, because there's some of this that is
Mhm.
so similar, and obviously Annihilation came after, but you could see the
Yeah.
inspiration so clearly, the zone and whatever, and they have like the alien war stuff, and that's kind of what I wish would have been dwelled on a little bit more. Was like that stuff. It was mentioned, it was talked about, and I get like, because this movie really isn't about anything except humanity. So I get that
Mhm.
like it can bounce around and do whatever it wants. I Yeah, there were just parts where I was like, okay, what am I actually sitting down? What am I looking at? And I am shocked. Like, no, I'm not shocked that this is your number one. This is a
Mhm.
very John movie. Like, I get that.
Yes.
That's for sure. I guess what I was shocked at is when I went over to Letterboxd, it has like a 4.4, and I was like, wow. Like, are that like a lot of these people? Like, I know, how many times have you seen this movie?
4 or 5.
Okay, because I was like, are these people who like feel like almost obligated to like it and have watched it one time, or are these people like you who have watched it 4 or 5 times and they just love it that much? Because when I sat down to watch this was not what I thought this movie was going to be at all. And I don't
Yeah.
mean that in a bad way, but it is not what I thought this movie was going to be at all. And I really liked the conversations, and I really liked the direction of the movie 95% of the time. But because it was so jarring, I almost had to like recalibrate myself.
Mhm.
And then I was like, uh-oh, like I have to do a podcast on this. I hope John's ready to talk about it, because it's funny, it's our last one, but this is the movie I feel like I'm having the hardest time really saying anything about,
Mhm.
because I almost feel like this is a movie I probably should have watched 2 or 3 times before trying to do a podcast on it. But I watched it in like the only down period I had, because obviously we just had a crazy
Yeah.
ass week, and we wanted to make sure we got this in and didn't have like a 2 week hiatus. So I'm like, I'm having a hard time, but I also don't want to talk down about it because I did enjoy it quite a bit. I just don't really know what to say.
I think when you hear this film described, it's described in a way where it like feels a lot like an Annihilation, right?
Yeah.
The plot really echoes similar to an Annihilation. It's also a Tarkovsky film, and if you've watched Tarkovsky's other films, I think this like if you've watched his
Very
entire
similar to
film library,
Solaris.
yeah, it is similar to Solaris, but it's not as high science fiction as Solaris is,
Mhm.
right? It's not it's not about aliens on another planet and like going to space and stuff. It's so close to home. And I think that's where I think Tarkovsky keeps this so intimate the entire time. I think it's
Mhm.
really important. Like we never learn our characters' names.
Yeah.
We only have like their nicknames that they're told to each other, and we see them in the real world and in the zone, and we see them evolve in the zone and change in the zone, and how it really shows them this reflection of themselves. Again, like I've compared this movie to The Wizard of Oz, and it's not just because it goes from like this like weird sepia toned black and white segment to color and then back to black and white. It's because these are characters who are going on this journey, and they discover that what they're looking for they've had the entire time,
Mhm.
and they're scared of it.
Yeah. Well, and my favorite part of this whole thing is when they keep talking about porcupine, porcupine, porcupine. He killed himself. He did this. He did that. Whatever. The fact that if the room gives you your deepest desires, and his brother
Mhm.
died and he got money instead, and he can't live with the fact that he desired the money more than his actual brother coming back to life. That's I mean, like, that's the type of stuff I'm like, all right, like
Yeah.
now we're talking. Like, there you go. And like those are the big questions that I love. And like that is handled like deftly. Like, it's so perfectly done. I'm a huge fan of that for sure. So yeah, it's heavy, it's deep, there's a lot. And like that's the kind of stuff where when I sit down and I watched it, I was like, ooh, that's kind of messed up, of like the human condition of okay, you can have whatever you want, but it is choosing for you what you
What I
actually
Yeah.
want. Like, it's not Dorothy saying, I there's no place like home, I just want to go home. It's not that. It's whatever you actually want the most is what this room is going to give you. And that's why nobody who goes to the room comes back happy or comes back at all, because they're realizing what they really want does not make them happy about who they are. And I mean, that whole questioning of humanity and desire and stuff is fascinating. I mean, it's absolutely fascinating.
Yeah, it is. And especially when we, like, again, we look at these three different characters who are so different from each other. Like, we have this like man of instinct and like emotion in the writer, right?
Mhm.
Where he's so driven by emotion and driven by his instinct. And then we have this almost this man of faith in the professor, which I think is a very interesting way of like framing this character, where he's so it's just so contrary to what you kind of think this professor is. Like, he's there to blow up the room because he believes in it
Yeah.
so much, and he believes in the power that it has so much, and even that he can't do. Like, it's just, I don't know, it's these three characters are so similar and so different at the same time, and you can really relate to different parts of them at different points in this story. I think one of the most telling lines of the entire movie is when they're talking with the writer after he hears the voice,
Mhm.
and he what do they say about him? He's too afraid to advance, but too ashamed to retreat.
Yeah.
Right? Like, and like, it's that paralysis that we as humans face all the time in our lives. We're trying to figure out what to do, what does make us happy, and that's what the power of the room is that it can finally tell us what makes us happy, and we're so scared to figure out what that actually is.
Yeah. Yeah. Because it's not the pure what do you call it? It's not the heroic thing most of the time.
Hmm.
I mean, that's the truth. It's not the noble. That's what it was. Noble is the word I was looking for. It's
Yeah.
not the noble cause. We all want to believe that we're noble and we would do that, but that's not what it is. Um and yeah, like I agree. I think having the three characters, because Stalker just kind of does what Stalker does. And
Hmm.
it's funny watching this on HBO Max, which is now Max. I mean, God forbid we just keep calling it HBO Max, and I don't get what
It's
they did.
available on Max.
Yeah, it's just called Max. That's how I watched it. Yeah.
No, I mean,
Um,
Stalker's available on that. That's
yeah, but
impressive.
they
I'm
call him
I'm
like a
I'm being
mental
impressed.
they call him like a mental mutant. And when that
Okay.
is like the description all the time on HBO Max always suck. They tell you what happens when
Yeah.
the cranes are flying. They ruin everything. But they call him a mental mutant. I don't think once in the movie is he referred to as like a mental mutant. He's referred to as a stalker who like has abilities, but we don't
Only his
ever like it's nothing beyond that.
only his daughter's referred to that way.
Yeah, okay. And okay, so what the hell? So I know that like when you're in the zone, you do this, you do that. What is that ending? Explain it. Because I wanted that ending, I wanted to sit there and be like, oh shit. And instead I was like, what?
Well, I think like the big thing with that ending is because we've gotten to the end of the zone, we've gotten to the room, and these men have kind of caved to it and not willing to go about it. I think the ending is to capitulate that there is actually something greater at work in the zone. And it's not just, you know, these humans like coming to these realizations and things. It is that there is actually some sort of force there and it's doing something. Because it's also really important. Every scene with the daughter at the end of the film is in color,
Yeah. Yep.
right? So it's making that correlation to the zone. And I don't know if we're supposed to believe the daughter, like, we know the daughter was born in the zone or like on the boundaries of the zone, but like, are we supposed to believe this daughter is like an alien of the zone? I'm not sure. But I
Yeah.
love the way that Tarkovsky starts it with one of the first shots in this film we see is a cup of water moving
Mhm.
because the train's going by, right?
Yep.
And then we get this scene at the end where the daughter is just proving they can have great things come out of the zone if they just weren't scared of it.
If they just weren't scared of it. Yeah. And the fact that it's being protected by military and all of that just
Mhm.
adds to like the mythology of the zone, right? It just
Yeah.
adds that layer to it. And the fact that it killed everybody involved with the movie. Thanks, John. In real life, this movie literally killed them. Okay, so I know you're a big historian of it. You know this, right?
I mean, I've heard the rumblings of it. I haven't like dived into it.
I mean, there's three of them. It was Andrei Tarkovsky, his wife, and Anatoly Solzhenitsyn, who is in like every I love
Tarkovsky
that
film?
guy.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's in those, but then he's in The Ascent. He's
Yeah, he's in like
fantastic.
every Russian movie ever.
He's so good. But they all got the same kind of lung cancer because of the plant that they were working at on this movie.
Oh, yeah, because and it wasn't even the original filming location.
Okay, that's what I was going to ask. Yes, okay, go ahead. So there you go.
Because they were filming it and then they had to move. So they moved to this place in which was it Estonia that they moved to, and they were filming there, and that's where this plant like had the runoff into the water.
And that's how they died. Like that, or at least that's what the thing is.
I mean, it took a little while still.
Yeah, it was a couple years, but it was all
we got a few more Tarkovsky movies out of it.
Barely. But it's just funny how like this real life zone did actually I mean, at least what people think is like cause all three of the people involved in this movie to get lung cancer.
Mm-hmm.
And like the whole point of this movie is to be like fearful of like going into this unknown location and like this weird area. And they actually picked the location they probably shouldn't have gone to.
Well, I mean, that's also part of the analogs of this film, and what it's kind of talking about too is like this of nuclear power, essentially, right? Yeah. And like what it can hold, because it is so powerful. But there's it's the Cold War still. There's the fear over nuclear destruction, right? Mm-hmm. So there's and at that time regulations on nuclear power plants. I mean, this was before Chernobyl, but kind of like really predicts Chernobyl really well.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And it's just fascinating how this sits in Russian history with that event happening later, and how that fear still permeates into our current society, despite how many how many safeguards there are for nuclear power now, right?
Yeah, because nuclear power always it's probably the most polarizing type of power there is, isn't it? I'd say that's fair.
Yeah, I would absolutely say that's fair. I think a lot of people are scared of it because of things like Chernobyl, 3 Mile Island, when it's one of the.
I lived next door pretty much to a nuclear power plant growing up. Like it was less than 10 minutes from my house.
Yeah, it's like it has the least ecological impact, and it has like one of the highest yields, but we're still scared of it. And I think that's. I don't think Tarkovsky could have predicted how this would look 50 years in the future.
I think it's kind of funny too, because Tarkovsky was doing this pre-Chernobyl. And post-Chernobyl, we see so many shows and movies based around nuclear power plant blows up and people die, because nuclear war is like such a big thing and such a big fear. But the nuclear power plant isn't like the same thing as that, right? And I think that's what's really funny, because I think about Dark, which is like one of my favorite shows of all time. Right. The whole premise of that is that they have a nuclear power plant that like they were hiding stuff beneath it. I mean, I can't really give the premise of Dark in under an hour or so. Those are pretty interesting points of like that fear and like those things. I mean, that's what I did really love about this were locations, and I love the change from sepia tone to color back to sepia tone, but then color with the daughter. I thought that was amazing. But the locations are very Russian. I feel like they really capture what Russia was like at this time. I think
it's so important that that's what it does, because you can go kind of all out in this and make it more dystopian. And to like a Western world type of person, this might seem dystopian, but it's not too far off how things were in certain parts of the Soviet Union.
Yeah. Well, because and like the thing with the Soviet Union, right, is like they didn't have like the same regulations or care on a lot of stuff. So it was like, oh, it's out of sight, it's out of mind. Like we'll send the people we don't like out near that or something. And I mean, it's funny because it is such a high concept, even though it's like not high sci-fi, like you were saying.
Yeah.
But I feel like there's so many elements to this movie that are so interesting that aren't touched on, and there's so many elements that are so hard to pick up on the first viewing. And there's so like I do wonder because like Solaris, I love like space travel ideas and
Yeah.
like things like that. So I do wonder with like a movie like Stalker if I would enjoy it more the more I watch it, or if it's one that I would kind of feel the same every time. And like Solaris would be the one that I would feel stronger and stronger about as I move towards it. I just wonder that because like this movie is just heavy conversation, heavy conversation, heavy conversation. I'm like, thanks, John. Like you got it. I mean, I know we both ended it on a very positive note, but thanks.
Yeah, I mean, but it's also paired with Tarkovsky's stunning visuals.
Yeah, the visuals are great. The locations are so good.
And like just the way Tarkovsky captures them. Even if we look at like even like the opening credits over the over the bar, and it's like, okay, what's so important about this place? What's going on here? And then we cut to the apartment, and the way he shoots it with the room, with the door like slightly open, and then the daughter sitting up as the stalker leaves. Like there's all these little details of the way he frames everything. There's the shot down like the tunnel into like the sand room and stuff. I love but the telephone scene is one of the best scenes in this entire movie. Not just based on like the conversations that's happening in it, but also just the way it's shot. The fact that Tarkovsky decided, I'm going to shoot this, but all you can see is what's ever head on through this door frame.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, Tarkovsky, it's funny because you made me watch, what, 4 of his movies, 5 of his movies now, whatever?
I'm pretty sure I only had 3 on my list.
But you had 3, so I went out and watched Solaris on my own. But his direction is phenomenal, and I know he gets brought up in, like, the circles, but because I think it's Russia, because I think it's Russian film, because that means it's subtitled and it's not, like I've been, watching like the best picture winners, best picture nominees. It's always in the 60s and 70s. It was like British movies. It was always British movies. Like that was the foreign air quotes movie that would get lumped in with the Oscars. It was always British. Sometimes you get Italian with like a Fellini or something like that. Sometimes Godard, but it was always European in some way. And most of the time it was British. I mean, I just watched My Fair Lady this week. It's so British. And like Russia, it's tough because Russia's still tough to sell people on like, go watch this Russian movie. And it's such a different world than what like North Americans are used to. And North Americans pretty much run the film industry. I know China is doing a good job with it, but it's pretty much North America. And so when there's not that immediate connection, it's hard to sit down and get somebody to just watch a Tarkovsky film. I had not seen any when we started this podcast, and I'm glad we watched this. I'm glad we did this podcast because now I feel like I've seen a bunch of stuff, and it's such a different style of movie, but all of his movies go with the same thing, and that's what's really cool about them. And I actually think like my favorite of like these humanity philosophy type things might be Ivan's Childhood, because Ivan's Childhood is very much about the same stuff, but it's a little bit more straightforward, which as somebody who likes kind of straightforward, like I like my weird movies every now and then, but I like a little bit more of a straightforward, get me with the emotion at the end.
Yeah. I think Tarkovsky's definitely this acquired taste. And I think the more you indulge in Russian cinema in general, the more you can really appreciate Tarkovsky and what he's doing. And like to think about when Tarkovsky was making these movies in comparison to what was happening in North America, I think it's really important that like these movies came out. The movies we're talking about tonight came out a year apart from each other, right? Like this is what was happening in different parts of the world at the same time. And like I guess like 79, like your big movies, what Apocalypse Now that year?
Yeah,
it's probably the biggest movie of 79, and like it's again like these are all movies that are dealing with this human element and this human, like what it means to be a human all at the same time, because these are the questions that were just everywhere in society, and Tarkovsky just captures it in a different way than these North American directors did, because these North American directors are appealing to a more mass audience. And I mean, Soviet cinema is like the Soviet Union had such high regard for cinema.
Mhm.
You could get away with making these crazy, ridiculous art films, and no one's going to question you about them.
Yeah.
We're like just getting to that point in North America.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, and when they do, it's always an independent. It's never going out to a
Mhm.
big studio. I mean,
Yeah.
whenever you would get one of those crazy like Terrence Malick type movies, a studio might pick it up afterwards, but a studio wasn't
Yeah.
picking it up when it was coming out. I mean, that's why
Yeah.
Terrence Malick didn't make a movie for 15 years.
Mhm.
Same thing with what's his name? Todd Field.
Yeah.
And his movies they're not nearly as art film as a Tarkovsky. But
No.
still, it's hard to get those movies made.
Mhm. And I think like the other thing with Tarkovsky has such a relationship with his father's poetry and just poetry in
Yeah, I love
general.
that stuff. Yeah.
It's it's again, it's part of like the heart of a Tarkovsky film, but it can be part of what makes it hard to connect to a Tarkovsky film too.
hmm hmm Yeah, and again, I connected, but then, like I said, it was just too. It's so heavy, and
So
there's so
good.
much
It is.
going on that it just it's hard. It's hard to like fully connect with this movie the first time you watch it.
It is definitely a multiple viewing type of movie, but I
Yeah,
would argue your number one is also a multiple viewing type of movie.
yeah, I agree. I agree. Yeah, I agree. Mine's
And
just a little bit
and
more. I think mine has like a little bit more distinct of like war is bad, where yours is more of like a what is it trying to say? You know what I
yeah,
mean? Which is good. I'm not saying that as a
mhm,
bad thing. I just think yours is a little bit more of I'm going to figure out something new every single time I watch it.
yeah, absolutely. And I think that's good. I think it's good, and I think that's why both of us are a little lower than we would have maybe expected the other to be on our number
Mhm.
ones, because like the reason these are our number ones is because these are movies you can't just sit there, watch it, and be like, okay, that was a good movie, right?
Yeah.
Like I said, like Casablanca is my number one moving forward. That's because that is a incredible movie in every bit. It's not hard to argue why that's a good movie,
Yeah.
and you know it just by watching it. With
Well, go ahead, keep going.
with
Sorry.
both of ours, why I think these movies come to our number ones is because these are movies you have to think about after you watch
Yeah.
them.
And it kind of goes back to what Damien Chazelle said earlier this year when he made Babylon, which is more movies should polarize.
Hmm.
And like I agree. I totally agree. Like you should not when everybody is saying a movie's great, it generally isn't that good.
Yeah.
Most of the time it's not. Most of the time it doesn't live up to that hype. Maybe Parasite. That might be the only movie
Hmm.
where like
I think
universal acclaim from wide audiences and critics.
I think like one of the big contrasts to like this is something like Top Gun Maverick,
Yeah.
which I might get flack for saying this, but while you watch Top Gun Maverick, it is the best movie ever made.
Yeah.
And as soon as you stop watching it, you can start realizing where the cracks are in that movie.
Yes, exactly.
And like
Exactly.
these movies are the opposite of that.
Yeah.
You're watching, and you're like, is this the best movie ever made? And then
Yeah.
you think about it and you start realizing what makes it one of the best
Yes.
movies ever made.
I think that's a phenomenal. That might be the best thing you said, John. You saved it for episode 100. That was like your best statement, I think, of this whole
I
podcast.
can't even
I'm not
take
kidding.
credit for it because my friend said it.
No, he didn't. He doesn't have a podcast. You said it.
Exactly.
But I agree. No, I totally agree. A lot of movies. I mean, Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind. The first time I watched it, I didn't like it. Adaptation, didn't
Mhm.
like it. And I was young when I saw
Yeah.
those, but there's a lot of movies, man. I mean, Social Network was one. I was like, what the hell is so good about the Social Network? And then I rewatched it. And
Mm.
I'm like, oh, that's what's so damn good about the Social Network. I mean, but a lot of times with these best pictures or these foreign films, people give them one chance.
Yeah.
And if they don't love it, they don't go back. It's hard to say, I'm going to go watch Stalker again. Can't
Yeah,
wait.
absolutely.
Friday night, baby, let's go. Like that's hard. So when these movies sometimes only get one chance, that makes it hard. But what do you want
Yeah.
to end with for Stalker? Because we're over a half hour here.
We are. I think what I want to end with start with Stalker is like this movie isn't going to be for everyone, but give it a shot and give Tarkovsky in general a shot. We've talked about him a lot on this podcast. Since we did this list, I also watched Andrei Rublev for the first time. That's a movie that's going to be in my like top 25 moving forward. Tarkovsky is, in my opinion, and this might be blasphemous for a lot of people, is the greatest director of all time. He has just such phenomenal works, all of them, even his like original film thesis, the steamroller and the violin, comes on the Criterion Collection Andrei Rublev disc. Also worth a watch. It's like a 40-minute short, but it's still worth a watch. And you can see right from the beginning the genius of Tarkovsky. You have to give him a shot. And like, I think this is a perfect reason as to why you can't just shoehorn yourself to North American movies, and you have to spread out, because otherwise I would never have known my love for Stalker.
Yeah. All right. We're going to move on. So we're going to do it as best movie we watched this week, but then also we want to do what was your favorite movie from the other person's top 100 that you watched for the first time. So give me your best movie you watched this week, John, and then we'll do the others.
So I watched a couple. There was a lot of travel this week, so I had some downtime to watch movies. And I kind of kept in the Stalker theme. I kind of watched a lot of these like low sci-fi films. I think none of them were like astounding. I'll say that. So I think I'm going to give the edge to Another Earth from 2013. I don't know if you've seen that one.
Haven't seen that one.
So it's essentially
that's the William Apother movie, isn't it?
Yeah, it is.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, William Apother in a starring role.
Yeah.
Woo!
Yeah.
Great. It's great because William Apother's a great actor, and just because like he's not the most handsome guy, he doesn't get leading roles, and like he kills it in this movie, in my opinion. It's just, it was interesting. It's a heavy movie. It's a really heavy movie. It deals a lot with like guilt and regret and like how you get past that. The science fiction's very, very limited in the movie, but it like kind of helps punctuate the theme. But there were some aspects of it that I felt like didn't quite go far enough. But it was still like, it's an hour and a half. Like it was worth a watch.
You should, I saw some of the others. You should read the book, Never Let Me Go. The book is phenomenal. And I'm not somebody who says the book is better than the movie. I think that's a stupid argument.
Yeah.
Never Let Me Go's book is fantastic. And they butcher one of the twists in the movie so bad.
The fact the movie doesn't like have them figuring out why they exist.
Yeah.
Baffles me. The fact that it's just like knowledge that they have and isn't like something they discover in the movie. What a disappointment. Because if they had that if they have that in the movie, that could be like an easy 4-star movie. But like you never have to deal with that existentialism of it.
Yeah, the concept is brilliant. The book is phenomenal. I only watched one new movie this week, which was My Fair Lady. I rewatched a bunch of others. My Fair Lady was pretty good, and it was the Best Picture winner over Strangelove, which is like obviously silly, and like Rex Harrison beat Peter Sellers, which is obviously silly, but it was good. I actually prefer Gigi, which I know could be like blasphemous to some people, but like I like Gigi a lot, and I think My Fair Lady is like perfectly fine. But in terms of like movies that actually was like the best, I rewatched Thunderball, and I know that's like one of your least favorite Bond movies, but man, I freaking love Thunderball. I think Thunderball is so damn funny. When the underwater scene goes on and on for like 20 minutes, I'm like, this is the funny. Like, it's just like who can get shot with a spear.
That's what takes it down for me is how long that scene is.
I love it. It's so ridiculous. It's so ridiculous. But honestly, from an artistic perspective, the underwater camera work in that movie is pretty
it's
phenomenal.
Like phenomenal. You can't deny that. Like,
yeah.
And like it's clear that's why they do it. Like, look what we can do. It's very much like a tech demo, essentially.
Yeah.
I think like a plot wise, Never Say Never Again handles the plot of Thunderball better.
I haven't watched that.
It's an interesting Bond, not Bond movie. But like Thunderball's fine. It's still a Connery Bond, right? Like they can only be, when you say it's a bad Bond movie, like it can only go so low when it's Connery Bond.
That is definitely the truth. So that being said, What do you got as your favorite movie of mine that you watched for the first time?
I've narrowed it down to two, and I have to think about it a little bit more when I actually like end up making my next top 100. Which one ends up like slotting higher? Because I think they're both really close. Um, it's and the funny thing is they're both movies that I didn't wait until they came up in the list for me to watch them,
Okay.
and that's The Graduate
Mhm.
and Once Upon a Time in the West.
Yeah, so The Graduate, by the time we actually got around to it, it was like your what, fourth time watching it?
Yeah, I watched it a lot, so like it's
Yeah.
probably the Graduate's probably just the answer. But Once Upon a Time in the West made me like westerns, and
Mhm,
like
mhm.
if you looked at my letterbox over the last 2.5 years, I've watched a lot of westerns because of that movie.
Yeah. Well, what do you got then? You gotta pick one.
I think in the end, it's probably The Graduate, and it's
Mhm.
just going to eke it out. We're probably looking at like no more than a 10 spot difference between those two
Yeah.
movies.
I like that. Yeah, mine is so I realized with yours, a lot of the ones that could appear on my next top 100 were movies I'd seen previously that I had just not put on. So
Yeah.
in terms of like new movie that I hadn't seen, I got to go The Third Man. I had thought
Yeah.
I had seen The Third Man, and really I'd only seen the Ferris wheel scene. Third
Mhm.
Man is brilliant, man. I love that movie. Third Man is the one I'm going to go with. It was between that and Mirror. But
Yeah.
I'm going to go with The Third Man overall and give that the edge just because it's more up my alley with the whole film
Yeah, for
noir.
sure. Yeah.
And Orson Welles is an absolutely horrible person in that movie, and it's so
Yes.
fun to watch.
And that, I mean, the Harry Lime reveal in that movie is
Mhm.
it's iconic. It's an iconic scene. Like just that grin,
Yeah.
it gets you right away.
No dialogue. It's so
Yeah.
good. It's so good. All right. Let's do The Deer Hunter, the last
Yes.
movie we're talking about for a couple months here, the last one on this series at least. So The Deer Hunter from 78. I always go back and forth between this and American Beauty as my favorite movie of all time. It kind of depends on the mood I'm in. One of the main reasons I chose The Deer Hunter over American Beauty was because I just feel like it's a more impressive film. Like for this podcast. So when I had to sit down and say, okay, Deer Hunter or American Beauty, Deer Hunter, American Beauty, I went with Deer Hunter. It's all about my mood. Those my
Mhm.
top three, really. It's all about my mood. But like American Beauty is the one that I can quote word for word the whole way through. But The Deer Hunter, what it is with this movie. So first of all, this was the first movie that really went at the Vietnam War after Vietnam
Mhm.
was over. This
Yep.
movie really changed Hollywood. It really changed Hollywood. This isn't why I love it, but I just want to state that off the front. You had The Deer Hunter. The next year, you had Apocalypse Now. In 78, you also had Coming Home, which is phenomenal. John Boyd ended up beating De Niro for the Oscar, but then Walken beat Bruce Dern for supporting, and Jane Fonda won lead for Coming Home. Hal Ashby, guy did Being There, and Harry and Tonto. It's great. But The Deer Hunter was the more iconic one because it actually goes into Vietnam, whereas Coming Home is, if I remember correctly, all in California. But after that, Apocalypse Now doesn't win Best Picture the next year because they weren't going to give back-to-back Vietnam War movies Best Picture. Platoon in the 80s. I mean, think about every Vietnam movie that all of a sudden
Mhm.
comes out. So this really like had the balls to be like, we're gonna take this on. But what I love the most about this movie is I don't think that this is a Vietnam War movie. I don't. Now that we've moved away from it, this could have been about um uh Desert Storm. It
Mhm.
could have been about whatever we're doing in Afghanistan. I don't even know if it has a name. I don't know what any of the stuff has a name in the Middle East at this point. I mean, I just know people are going. But this movie is about a group of friends who are leading their lives. These
Mhm.
ordinary, bland, perfectly fine lives. They have nothing more, they have nothing less. They have each other, they have their town, they have their jobs that are so blue collar. They go, they drink, they know every bar owner, they know everybody who works at the grocery stores, and everybody knows everybody. And Vietnam has nothing to do with them. And yet they're the ones that the government convinced, go fight our war, go fight it.
Yeah.
And they go, and they fight it, and their whole lives are uprooted for nothing. For nothing. It had nothing to do with them. And their whole lives are so drastically changed. And growing up in like a really small town, it wasn't like this. We weren't living in like the little shack thing off the side, but in a really small town where a lot of people did go military. It's a very blue collar town. I just told you we have a nuclear power plant, a lot of like marinas and things like that. It's not for these big boats. It's for little normal like dinghies that people are just taking out every now and then, like whatever. It's to see that and see kind of how, you know, the world convinces those people to do things sometimes, kind of playing on their naivete, and then like you have to want something more. Why would you want to stay here? That's what always got me with this movie. And the relationship between the 6 male characters in this, I find to be one of the most authentic depictions of friendship ever, like on film, because they're older. They're not young. They're not like 22. They're a little bit older. But the way they talk to each other, the background conversations in this are fantastic. And I just love it. Like, they like to drink beer. They like to chase girls. They like to go deer hunting. And they go to Vietnam, and some of them come back, some of them don't. And everything is different. And it's for what? And the God Bless America at the end, to me, because I know that was like a controversial ending, and it still kind of is. To me, it's the biggest FU to the American government probably ever put on film. I really believe that. It's the biggest FU ever. But anyway, I love everything about this movie. And the first Russian roulette scene, I think, is the best scene ever put on film. I really do. I think the first Russian roulette scene, the way that elevates tension throughout, and it just keeps going up and up and up and up. And De Niro's performance in that scene is just out of control. It's out of control. I love that. I think it's the best scene ever put on film, and it's a perfect middle point so that the other ends of it can do. There's 10 minutes of war in this movie, if you even want to call it war, because Cimino didn't want to make a war movie.
No, but that he needed that contrast there. And I do think like that contrast is so pivotal to the understanding of what this is, because as we leave, like you said, I originally gave this 2.5 stars because I really didn't jive with it.
Yeah.
And I had to, in retrospect, put it up because I was like, no, okay, this is at least a 3-star movie because it's so well constructed. There are so many little things that make it really strong. I felt like it was missing a couple of things for me. And I was even texting you about it. Like, I don't know if that's because I'm Canadian and like the Vietnam War wasn't a thing here. So like we in our education system, we're like, hey, look how much the US messed this up. And like that's the lens that we as Canadians are educated on in the Vietnam War, right? As this was a complete mistake. And I don't know, like, is that what they teach down there too?
Oh yeah. No, Vietnam is the only one that America can't even try to give patriotism to.
Okay.
Vietnam was a total disaster. And that's why when a movie like The Deer Hunter came out, it forced everybody in America to kind of view it that way. Like it really did.
Right.
Because up until that point, you still tried to do it. And you'd hear the stories about, oh, this person did this person did this. And like they come back and they couldn't fit in and blah, blah, blah. But this movie like really forced it. This movie forced that perspective. Because once this movie was made, all of a sudden everybody was like, Vietnam was a disaster.
Yeah.
And this is why it was a disaster. We were killing off our youth for no reason.
Yeah.
We're just killing off our youth. It's horrible. I mean, it's horrible. I mean, that's like one of those. Vietnam is one of those. I mean, America's one of the most politically divided countries right now. Like it's at least it's at one of its most politically divided points.
Yes.
In its history. Vietnam is one that I think pretty much everybody agrees on. There's no, oh, this is good, this is bad. No, people all know Vietnam was a freaking disaster, but it made a lot of damn good movies. That's really that's really the only positive that came out of Vietnam.
Sometimes mistakes have that way because we
right. I mean, because you got people pissed off. Cimino was pissed off. Oliver Stone was pissed off. Francis Ford Coppola was pissed off.
Yeah, and I mean, I think the point where it actually doesn't connect with me is Canada's approach to militarism is so different than the American approach to it, right?
Mm.
And like I've seen this like firsthand. When I went to Columbus, Ohio to go to hockey games, because I'm that type of person, it's weird having acknowledgments of veterans everywhere,
Yeah.
right? Like, as me as a Canadian, because we don't do that here. It's just not something we do. And it's one of these major cultural differences between the United States of America and Canada. And I think like it makes it hard for me to connect completely with that because we don't have, yeah, of course we have military recruiters and stuff. Like they're going to exist in every country, but it's not to the extent it is in the States, right? So even when I'm watching this like first hour of this movie and we're seeing these three guys who are just so excited to go out and fight for their country, it's still not quite hitting home for me because like I don't know. I'm just not a patriotic guy.
Well, and so I think that's the sinister element, right? Like you were talking
Yeah,
about with Stalker, how it's so scary because you don't know the unknown.
yeah,
I think the scariest part about this movie is that they everybody who hates this movie, and I'm talking hates, I'm not talking dislikes, I'm
yeah,
talking hates. Everybody who hates this movie, their biggest complaint is that the wedding part is way too long. It goes on, it's never ending, blah, blah, blah. I could watch 2 more hours of the wedding scene and never get tired of it because it is every one of them. They are what, 24, 40. I think they're 48 hours away from going off to basic training.
yeah.
They're 72 hours away. They're 72 hours from their lives being ruined forever, and they're having the time of their lives. They
Mhm.
don't know. We see the Christopher Walken gets engaged to Meryl Streep, but we see that De Niro is trying to get with Meryl Streep, and we see John Cazale trying to get with girls, and then you got the singer who comes over and is grabbing her ass, and you got George Dudza just laughing and making fun of him, and John Savage just got married. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
Like he just got married. It is a gigantic party because it should be, and it's showing the details of what is important to their lives. And I think that's what's fascinating about a movie like The Deer Hunter. It's 178 minutes long.
it's
I
long.
think there's 15 minutes of war. And again, I'm using air
Mhm.
quotes. If you count I'm not counting the end with Walken and De Niro and Saigon. I'm not counting that as war. I'm talking like when our characters are in war, I think there's 15 minutes of the movie. But why that's so important is because the war meant nothing to them. It
Yeah,
ruined their lives, but it meant nothing because prior to that, they were loving life. They were doing
mhm.
everything. And that's what it is for me. I never went to war. I have a
Yeah,
couple friends who went. I know a lot of people who went, but I don't like I don't personally, I wasn't affected by it. You know what I mean? But that is why I love this movie, is because
mhm.
it's not about the war. And like, yes, I get the patriotism thing, but it's also that's the small town feel. It's
Yeah,
you're gonna go do something so much bigger. You're gonna fight for your country. How awesome is that? It's bullshit. The reason they're
mhm.
getting the small town person is because they're the ones who are gonna do it. Their parents aren't
Yeah,
gonna pay for them not to go. You know what I mean? In the cities in the rich parts of the cities, that wasn't happening. You gotta be kidding me.
mhm.
And in the poorer parts of the cities, those are the ones who were protesting it the hardest.
Yeah,
So it's like that's what I love about it. And then you get these 15 minutes, and then it's the hour and a half afterwards. America doesn't give a shit about you. They don't
yeah,
care. Thank you for your service. And that's why they put up the memorials. Why do they put up the memorials? They put up the memorials because it's that reminder that, oh,
mhm.
it's honoring the dead and honoring those who fought. It's also a reminder that like we're kind of like a war heavy country. You
Yeah,
could, you could, if you're gonna die, at least they died with purpose. I think a lot of people are anti-war at this point, but this movie just hits that so hard of the taking advantage of like the lower class blue
mhm.
collar towns in America. And that first hour, man, I'm telling you, I could watch it and watch it and watch it. I love every second of it because they're just having fun and the character building is just so good. And then they get deer
Mhm.
hunting, and we get the whole thing of De Niro being too intense for everybody, but that's what helps him when he actually gets out there. And the whole this is this thing. And I mean, and the guys who aren't going just not getting it. They just don't get it.
Yeah.
I love that. I love all of that. So I get what you're saying, but your cat is now attacking you.
Yeah, I figured this might happen without me being gone for a week before we did
Mm,
this, but
mm.
Yeah, I think he finally realized I was home.
Yeah, there you
But
go.
I agree. Like, this movie really does show the predatory nature of the just U.S. politics in general, right? And how by spinning things to be about patriotism, by spinning them to be about this is for the betterment of our country, you can convince anyone to do anything, right?
Yeah,
Like, even if we just look historically, right? Like, how many things that are like, how many atrocities in the world are built on that exact concept,
yeah,
right?
yep.
And what the Deer Hunter does do well is like uses this symbolism, uses this. I think it's I mean, one thing I do complain about is there are 5 Russian roulette scenes in this movie.
There should have been 10.
No, there shouldn't have been, because 5 is a lot. It's a
I love
lot.
them.
And like they each have these different purposes, right? And I think that's really important here. I think it's really important for this movie to use Russian roulette
Mm-hmm.
as this like big thing here, right? Because that's what else is the movie saying there? We're in the middle of the Cold War. The entire
Yep.
reason this is happening is because of the Cold War. The entire reason the Vietnam conflict happens is because the Americans decided the Russians couldn't win anything.
Yep.
It was this proxy war between two superpowers, and the Americans were just sitting there like, okay, we have a gun with a bullet in one of these chambers to our heads. How
Mhm.
many of them are going to shoot us in the head?
Yeah. Well, and so how prevalent was Russian roulette during Vietnam, John?
I don't know.
None. There's no documented cases of POWs actually participating in Russian roulette. And
Okay.
when Chimino had that brought to him, he said, "Yeah, I know." And he said that
That's
I
not the
didn't say I
point.
was. Yeah, I didn't
Yeah.
say I was making the ultimate, most realistic version of war. But
Yeah.
I think the brilliance of Russian roulette with the old style guns. What is that? What's your chances of shooting yourself and killing yourself? 1 in 6.
1-6.
Yeah, there's 6 bullets. Or there's six holes and there's one bullet. So 1 in 6 chance. What that is stating is it was all random. Who was going to die in the war was random. Everybody who was going to perish was random. Why we
Yeah.
were in the war was random. It's all random. It's
Mhm.
all bullshit. Like that, it's a brilliant way of stating like this is all nonsense. But it also is able to show at first these characters are so terrified, and then we have Christopher Walken just putting the gun to his head all the time. We have
Mhm.
the one scene where I don't consider it a Russian roulette scene, but where De Niro puts the gun to John Cazale's head and pulls the
Yeah.
trigger. He
Yes.
pulls the trigger. Okay. Like that is the type of stuff where I'm like, that's next level thinking about it, right? Because it's the same
Mhm.
thing with Apocalypse Now. Like, how realistic is Apocalypse Now in a lot of elements?
Not
A lot,
a lot.
very. A lot of other stuff, not at all. But it's not about the realism. It's about the movie. And
Mhm.
what needs to be realistic is the relationships and the human element and the stuff that's happening in Clarion, Pennsylvania. That's
Yeah.
what needs, or Clarion, whatever it is. That is what is important. And that's what he keeps realistic. Everything that happens there is so realistic. Doesn't matter how realistic the stuff in the war is. What it's showing is that I mean, essentially, Robert De Niro travels down the heart of darkness a year before Sheen does because he's
Yeah.
going to find Christopher Walken as Saigon's falling, and it's a total hellhole. Okay, De Niro wasn't going to find Christopher Walken at that time, but those Saigon scenes, I mean, that's
Yeah.
that's what it was.
Mhm. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
yeah,
I mean,
go ahead.
it definitely does capture some of these things, right? And it captures what Vietnam was. And I think it's so important. It's so important this movie ends with the retreat from Saigon,
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yep.
right?
Completely agree.
It's showing everything. And like, you might like the first Russian roulette scene. The last Russian roulette scene is by far my favorite because it just
Oh,
shows the
with Walken and De
deterioration of these
Niro.
people. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's just, it's one man fighting to bring another back and the other just being too far gone to be done. And like that says so much about, I mean, just like the American approach to veterans, like just how veterans are often forgotten. And like even when you do try to like help them, sometimes they're too far gone because they've
Yeah.
been neglected for so long.
Yeah, and that's the big purpose is
Mhm.
when they have no guidance, right? Like some of these people come home and they don't know what they're going to be. John Savage can't go talk to anybody because he's lost his legs, and he can't go see his
Mhm.
wife because his wife. Do you realize that his wife Angela doesn't actually say a line of dialogue until the end of the movie when they're all singing God. She might like mumble stuff off camera, but she doesn't have like a distinct line of dialogue until the end of the movie when they're doing God Bless America and she says it's a gray day. That's the first time. But what I'm getting at with that is like, so you have these people, they can't even handle it now that they're back. Michael doesn't want to go see anybody. He drives
Mhm.
past, goes stays in a hotel, and nobody understands it. And then you have the people who the AWOL, the people who are left there, MIA, whatever. And that's Christopher Walken. And that last scene, what's so brilliant about it is the way it is shot. It is shot just like the first one. De
Mhm.
Niro's going to save Christopher Walken. He's going to save him. It's
Yeah.
going to happen. He's looking around. He sees the guy with the gun over there, the guy with the gun over there, the guy. He's done it once. He can do it again. He's going to figure it out. He's going to get them out. And when he's talking, this is what you want. This is what you want. And there's nothing. There's nothing. There's nothing. And then he goes, this is where Walken wins the Oscar to me when he starts
Mhm.
doing the faces there because you see that he's
Yeah.
starting to recognize, but it's not clicking. And he says one shot, and you're like, oh, thank God. And he just grabs the gun and shoots himself in the head. And it's so devastating because it's
Mhm.
so final. And what is phenomenal about this movie is while De Niro is the main character, Christopher Walken's Nicky is the most likable character. He's the
Yes.
one who's the glue. It's not De Niro who's the glue. Who's the best man for Steven? It's Christopher Walken, not De Niro. Who's the one when De Niro is doing the this is this, you can't have my boots, Stash. It's Walken who says, what's the matter with you? What is wrong with
Mhm.
you? He's the one who holds them together. And those little details in this movie, and I was talking to this with my wife, the little details in this movie of any other movie, the best man to Steven would be De Niro. And then
Mhm.
next in line would be Christopher Walken and then the other characters. If you actually look at the order, it's Steven, his best man is Nicky, then it's Stash,
Mhm.
then it's De Niro. So De
Yeah.
Niro isn't that like they're all important to each other, obviously. But Michael isn't this larger than life, I'm some hero, big shot, whatever. But he's always the most intense. And he can go figure it. He has the solution. He's gonna find his way. But it's Nicky who's the one who everybody likes the most. He's the one who's
Mhm.
got Meryl Streep. He's the one who sticks up for Stash. He's the best man. He is the one who Mike, I can't hunt with these other assholes. I need you. I need you.
Yeah.
He's the one everybody goes to. He's really supposed to be the main character of the movie. But what this movie is about is coming back from the war. And
Yeah.
so it needs to be Michael. But that's why that last scene when Nicky shoots himself, it is absolutely heartbreaking. It's
Mhm.
so much more devastating than it really has any right to be because Christopher Walken disappears for like an hour of the movie.
Yeah. Yeah. And it feels like a lot longer than an hour.
It does. It does. I
It
agree.
does because like that the and I think that's just the way it's shot, and I think it's very intentional. You can tell how intentional it is. You want that to feel like a lifetime.
Mm-hmm.
You want it to feel long enough to forget that Nick is still alive,
Yep.
right?
Yep.
And like that's why it's so important when you find out that he's still alive, and that's why it's so important when Michael goes back for him. And
Yep.
it's also why it's so important. I love the fact that we get this second deer hunting scene.
Yeah. And what my favorite part of the second deer hunting scene isn't even Michael not being able to shoot the deer. It's Axel and John chasing after the deer with like the guns, like they're like running around, giggling, laughing,
Yeah,
whatever. And they're joking around. They don't care. It
yeah,
is what they're deer hunting. Who cares? They're playing war. And Michael, who's been there, can't even do this now. And Stosh is
yeah.
chasing the deer in the lake. Like, that's what I love about it. But the second deer hunting scene is phenomenal.
Hmm.
Did you catch
Yeah.
one? And then he goes to Steven. Did you catch one? No, I didn't get one. You didn't get a deer. You didn't get it. Like, it's unbelievable.
Yeah.
Like he can't fathom.
Yeah, and it's just it really goes to show how damaged these
Mhm.
people coming back from Vietnam were.
Yeah. Yeah. And yeah, I mean the performances, I love the performances top down,
Mhm.
and Walken, I think it's one of the great performances ever.
Yeah.
I mean, when I was a kid, the first time when they're in the bar and they start playing Frankie Valli, and you're too good to be, that scene, I was like, I want to be that guy when I get older. And that's
Yeah.
why though, right? Like those little moments, and they're all singing, and the mom comes in, and Stosh taking the beer away from Steven. Like, come on, man, not too much courage, huh? You don't want to be too comfortable. Like that scene, and but while Walken gets all the credit, and he does, I mean, he deserves it. He's the best. He's the best part. De Niro's great.
Yeah.
This was John Cazale's last movie. Engaged to Meryl Streep. Meryl Streep took the role because she wanted to spend more time with him. Up until this, she'd been in like Annie Hall very briefly, or Manhattan very briefly, whatever it was. She hadn't been in much. Julia was the movie. She is the same year Walken was in Annie Hall.
Right.
But she wanted to be with John Cazale because she knew he was dying. So she takes this role, and it shot her into oblivion because she got her first Oscar nomination. The next year, she wins for Kramer versus Kramer.
Yeah.
3 years later, she gives arguably the greatest performance of all time in Sophie's Choice. So it launched her. It was crazy, and she almost didn't even take the role. But John Cazale does not get the credit. And I know I talked about this with Fredo, and I know I talked about this with I mentioned his other movies, Dog Day Afternoon, in the conversation. I love his character in this. His character is such a schmuck, but he's such a his self-confidence is so low, but he's so funny, and he's such a dick to everybody. And the way that he delivers it, and knowing that he never actually watched this movie. He died before this movie was released. When he's looking at himself in the mirror and he's straightening it, blah, blah, blah. Like the last scene of this movie, the guy who had brain cancer and knew he was dying, is them all sitting around singing God Bless America because their best friends died.
Yeah.
Like his performance is out of control, man. It's out of control too. And like Walken's the best, but Cazale, he would have been a household name. Had he not died. I mean, he was 42 years old. I mean, he would have been a household name. He would have been a household name. But those little things, right, in film history, little thing. The guy has brain cancer, right? Little thing. But those little things of that happening and Meryl Streep then doing the movie, if she doesn't do The Deer Hunter, do we even talk about Meryl Streep? Probably not.
Probably not.
Like, who would have found her? So I love that. I just wanted to talk about that. But John Savage is phenomenal in this too, I think. His panic attack moments in the under the Russian roulette is phenomenal acting. He was never really in anything again. But I want to bring up this last thing here because I know we're almost at a half hour for my movie. We started at like 41. I want to bring this up, One with the Stone. I'd like to hear your thoughts on how the final roulette scene determines the careers of Walken and Robert De Niro. What do you think here, John?
I
have a strong feeling.
I think De Niro was on his third of 4 of the greatest performances someone can have in a career. 4 movies that are in your top 100. I don't know if this really impacted that at all. I mean, like De Niro. This is the span where De Niro does Taxi Driver, The Godfather Part 2, The Deer Hunter, and Raging Bull.
Yeah, all in 6 years.
All in 6 years. Like it's one of the greatest 4 film runs ever, ever by a single actor. And I don't know. I guess I didn't really think about this at all.
So I have a very strong feeling on it. Okay. De Niro was always going to keep being a star, right? De Niro, even as he got older, was always still going to be the number one guy. With Christopher Walken dying in this movie, he never became a leading man, right? One of the best performances ever. It's one of his first roles. He never becomes a leading man. And I think because of this last scene, because of where his character goes, he can't become a leading man. He doesn't have the look for, he doesn't have that rugged look that people were looking for back in the late 70s, early 80s anyway. But it was like no matter how good he was, he always was just going to be supporting roles. He had to just continue to be supporting roles because he was the likable or the heart of something, but he was not going to be the one who carried it the way De Niro carried it. So I do think that like by being this character, it's one of the best performances I've ever seen. It made Christopher Walken who he is, but it also made him a supporting guy for his entire career.
Yeah, but I mean, that's fine. Like the work
No, I
Christopher
agree.
Walken has done in his career is phenomenal.
Yeah.
And like, let's be real. Like when he's the leading man, because he's had a couple of them, he wasn't. They aren't his best performances.
No, they're not because he's a supporting guy. He is. And what happened, what actually hurt Christopher Walken was that he assumed that Michael Cimino was worth working with again. And he did Heaven's Gate.
Yeah.
And I mean, you have to think this is so. I mean, obviously, we're almost done here, but I just want to mention this. Michael Cimino makes this movie. Now, Michael Cimino was total. He was not a very good person when it came to films, right? Like he was mean to people on sets. He was doing whatever. He tried to get Derek Washburn or Washington, whatever the screenwriter's name is. He wanted to take his credit away. He was a pain in the ass to work with. Yeah. But he made this movie that was a huge box office success, changed film in America, got Christopher Walken on the map, had him win an Oscar, put Meryl Streep on the map. De Niro, like, really showed that, like, this guy's just here to stay, whatever.
Yeah.
2 years later, his career is over with Heaven's Gate. And Christopher Walken is the second leading guy in that movie, behind Chris Christopherson. And with how unsuccessful that movie was, it really hurt Christopher Walken, I think. I think that hurt him more than this movie. But that's why The Deer Hunter, though. So, John, you were talking about with Stalker and Tarkovsky, one of the greatest directors of all time, if not the best. According to you, he's the best, which, you know, he's close. But Michael Cimino didn't do anything else.
Yeah.
And that's why The Deer Hunter's a hard one to stumble upon these days. Because people like to be like, oh, what Scorsese movie have I not seen? What Coppola movie have I not seen? What whoever, Kurosawa or Tarkovsky. Cimino didn't do anything, which makes it hard to find and watch The Deer Hunter.
The Deer Hunter suffers from the fact that AFI has not redone their top 100 list.
100%.
It's been what, 20 or 17 years since their last update? Yeah. So,
but I don't know if they would keep The Deer Hunter on it all these years later.
I don't know. But like that's what I want to see, though. I want to see that evolution of that list. That's what I like about like the BFI Sights and Sounds list is like, I mean, first off, they give us two lists because they give us the director's list and they give us the like members list.
Yeah.
And like it changes and like we can see that evolution and we can kind of track how it works with what we're seeing movie releases. And AFI, I'm getting to the point. I think I'm at like 79 of that second top 100 now. I'm almost there. I'm getting there this year. I'm finishing that top 100.
Yeah.
I promise. But it's just like, tell us more, because the other thing is like this last list was made before 2007.
Yeah. You know what the problem is though, John? And this is the truth. This is 100% the truth.
Yeah.
AFI is a non-profit, if I'm not mistaken. They accept donations to keep themselves going, right? Like that's what they're all about. AFI is scared because it's just kind of like, oh, it's our panel and it's like a hidden panel unlike BFI. I think they're scared to put out a list in the polarized America that we live in. I think they're scared to put it out. Because let's say they made a list and they didn't put Moonlight. I don't think Moonlight's even close to a top 100 movie ever made. I don't even think it's close. But if they didn't put Moonlight, that's going to cause a stir. But then if they put Moonlight at number 1 ahead of Citizen Kane and The Godfather, people are going to go, are you kidding me? And I think in this polarized society we live in, a lot of those, if you go look at the 2007 list, where do you put Gone with the Wind nowadays? Where do you put it? It has to be in there. I don't think it's that good, but it has to be in there.
It's one of the ones I haven't watched yet, so I can't actually comment on it.
Yeah, okay, but I'm just saying, like,
I get what you mean.
Gone with the Wind 2 years ago, whatever it was.
It's a movie that's been kind of, had a lot of negative light on it for a lot of the depictions in the film.
So what do you do?
So, I get it. Yeah.
Because it's, if you're arguing like what's the most important movie in film history, it might be that. Like at least American film history.
We saw how they adjusted with, because they had Birth of a Nation in the first one.
And then they did Intolerance, which is literally just the opposite of Birth of a
The
Nation.
opposite
Intolerance
movie.
is better by a lot, but
Yeah.
it's the
But
same.
like, but like, I wonder how they would approach that situation. I don't know. And like, we've kind of divulged into talking about the AFI, but like, I remember when the 2006 list came out, or like the list in 2007 came out, like that 10 episode series was one
Amazing.
of the most thrilling things I have ever watched.
It's
Like,
on YouTube. You can watch it on YouTube.
Yeah, but I've also like, I might do that. Let's be real.
It is fun, dude. I actually did it not too long ago. It is fun to see like what they talk about with each movie and what they show and blah. And Morgan Freeman narrates it. Like it is pretty fun. It is fun.
Yeah. But like, give us that again. I watched one. There, like Amazon did a series with like top 100 horror movies that they did that with. Like those type of things are really fun to watch, and I want AFI to enlighten me. Like the best thing about the AFI top 100. I mean, even if like, I mean, Phil, a lot of your top 100 is on that AFI top 100.
Yeah.
Right. And it's because it's a great starting place to look at film.
Yeah.
And like bringing this back to the Deer Hunter, I probably never would have heard of the Deer Hunter if it wasn't for that list.
Mm-hmm.
And like that's why these Film Institute lists should happen, because we're at a point in time where like film's really appreciated right now. Right? Like even if we like look at the climate in Hollywood right now, it's like
they're not gonna have actors.
Strike.
They're done. Yeah.
Right? Like film's really appreciated. And it should be revered. And that's what I think is part of the reason why we do this series, right? Like, yes, we love talking about movies, but we also love sharing our movies with people.
Yeah.
And like all of you listeners, we couldn't be more thankful to have this platform to talk movies and share them with you and get your opinions on them.
Yeah.
The amount of people who comment on either our letterbox reviews or in the comments on YouTube and just say like what they think of these movies, it's amazing. And I just wish there were in today's society where this landscape can be really inundated. I wish we had these bigger authorities stepping up and spreading this love for movies again.
Yeah. And I think the biggest problem is, and I said this, but I think the biggest problem again is just they're scared of the and the problem is, John, like you and I, we could sit there and watch it. They could put Gone with the Wind at number one. I'd be like, I don't agree, and I'd move on with my life. It's the people who actually don't give a shit about this stuff who ruin it.
Yeah.
They really do.
Yeah.
They ruin it because they make their think pieces, they put out their lists, they do whatever. And it prevents, people are so scared of backlash. That what AFI is going to make a top 100 list. They're going to put this whole thing together. They're going to put Gone with the Wind in there. People are going to boycott AFI, which doesn't even make sense. But like, you know what I mean? Like, that's why I think you're not going to see an AFI list. I think they're done. And I don't blame them. They're too worried about what do we actually need to put in as opposed to what do we think should be in.
Well, that just means it's up to you and I to spread the word of the Deer Hunter.
That's it. Because I'm going to like what I like. I don't care. I don't care. But, okay, we got way off track. Deer Hunter's amazing. It's my favorite movie of all time. I love it. It's so good. It's so well made. Anyway, John and I, thank you all for doing this. It's mind-blowing that we actually hit this point. We're taking a 2-month break. On Monday, July 24th, we're going to start our second series, our second season. Not of our top 100. We're going to do something totally different. We're going to go through the Marvel Cinematic Universe in order. Start with 2008's Iron Man and work our way all the way through it. Only the films. I'm not watching the TV shows. I'm not doing any of that. But I've actually only seen like 4 of them. And I talk a lot of shit about those movies. I need to put my money where my mouth is. So I'm going to tell you all why they're not good, even though I haven't seen them. And what we'll do as the second film for each of those is going to be a movie that either just came out or it could be out for like a week or it's on Netflix or something, blah, blah, blah. So that's what we're going to be doing. So the first episode on July 24th, it's a very purposeful date, is going to be Iron Man from 2008, and it's going to be Barbie, the Greta Gerwig, Ryan Gosling, and Margot Robbie. We're doing Barbie, and we're doing that. So it's a total departure from what we did here. You know our top 100. And then the next week, we're going to do, what's the next movie in the Marvel Cinematic? The Incredible Hulk. We'll probably be doing that with Oppenheimer.
Yeah.
Yeah. So there you go. That's what we're going to be doing, though. We're looking forward to doing that, but we need a break. I need a break so bad. So We're going to take that break. I hope you all enjoyed our top 100. This was a pleasure. I can't believe John and I actually made it through. When I texted him, I thought, whatever, dude. Like, yeah, I'm sure this guy's going to stick around for 100. He did. We're still here. I love that.
And we got to meet each other before we did this last episode.
Which is crazy. It's crazy. Yeah. But I'm so excited to keep moving forward with this. We love talking movies. We'll still manage to talk about these like really good movies, like movies that we really like to talk about. We'll still find a way to incorporate that and everything like that. But we're going to do the MCU and we're going to do new movies that are coming out. And hopefully Barbie and Oppenheimer are worth the hype, because if they are, that'll be a good start to our series.
Yes.
But anyway, John, thank you. Good job. I'm impressed. That's dedication. That's a lot of determination. A lot of late nights for no reason for both of us, but it was so much fun. Everybody who listened, thank you. And we'll see you in 2 months. That's it.
Okay.
End of an era, John. End of an era.